you don't know me, I will walk into that thing. Good morning, everybody. It's so nice to see you. I'm going to tell you an old story. You know, lately, as I look around the earth, I listen to the news, I experience people in the world. It is devastating. It is difficult. There are so many giants. Financial despair, collapses of economies, dictators rising, war coming and going, people being horribly divided. A look can get you killed. It's weird out there. And it's becoming intense. It would be so easy when you look at the global problems to freak out and have anxiety attacks and get depressed and run and everything. But we have a story in the Bible that we have heard since we were children, all about giants. You know the story. It's from the book of Samuel, 1 Samuel. Oh, my fault, not the machines. Oh, yeah, I need to be more in front. Okay, here we go. Up comes a giant standing in the valley. His name is Goliath of Gath. And he comes out every day for 40 days. And he growls in the general direction of the Israelites. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were dreadfully afraid. They were not just afraid, they were dreadfully afraid. And they asked this question. Maybe. Oh, so the men of Israel said, "Have you seen the man who has come up?" Now, I tried to imagine standing in front of a giant. And I found some pictures on Pinterest, but they had skeletons, and I thought that might be a little scary. But when you look at the heads, they were the size of wheelbarrows. They were huge. And you look at this person standing in front of you who is so tall. His chainmail vest they wore weighed 125 pounds. That's a lot. That's heavy. He had to have another guy carry it for him. And he comes out every day and he makes fun of them. And he makes fun of God. And he taunts and he mocks and he laughs at them. And for 40 days, the Israelites, they didn't know what to do. They have no idea. And so you have this Godzilla standing in the middle of them, roaring out and absolutely terrifying them. And my friends, we look at the world, it is terrifying. It is roaring. Have you seen Satan roar like this before? I haven't, not all at once, not everything. And it just seems in every direction. He's mocking God. I own this earth. I own the leaders. I own everything. That's how Satan thinks. I own it all. Got it right here. And you know the story. Who comes? The kid, the shepherd, the guy they left behind because he was too young. And he's the one who runs in to bring his brothers food. We know the story. He brings them food, and they say, and he turns around and he hears this monster, this huge, gigantic, and his response, not like his brothers, not like anybody in Israel. I'm just going to go next. I seem to be, there it is. Then David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight this Philistine." And Saul said to David, "Who are you?" It went really, really far forward. Okay, let's go back, see if I can do it right. One more? Okay, one more. Oh, see, it's right there. It just starts jumping, but that's okay. We'll use this one. So Saul says to David, "You're not able to go against the Philistines to fight with him, for you are youth, and he is a man of war from his youth." I'm going to read it from my Bible. "I went out." Okay, I'm going to read it from my Bible. But David said to Saul, "You are a servant used to keep his father's sheep. And when the lion," he says, "Your servant used to keep his father's sheep. And when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went out after it and I struck it and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it arose again, I caught it by the beard and struck and killed it. Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and the uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defiled the armies of the living God." I used to work in a zoo, and I preached about it a couple times. You do not grab the beard of a lion. You do not grab the beard of a lion. But this kid, he knew something. He was in charge of protecting, and out of love, he runs forth, he grabs the beard of a lion and kills him. I also got to work in the zoo, and we had a bear. It was a baby bear that its mother had been killed, and they brought the baby to us so we could find a big zoo for him to live in. And so we nursed him to health, but we realized bears, the baby ones, you have to play with them. So Kathy and I kind of looked at each other and said, "How do we do this?" And I said, "Oh, I want to get in with the bear," And so we put on this huge suit, real thick, and I'm like, "You sure we're going to need this? He's just a little bear." And I went in, and you're kind of walking, and I'm like, "Oh, aren't you cute?" He stood up. He was about this tall, and he whacked me with his paw and knocked me on my rear end. Boom, just like that. And he was a baby bear. David ran forward and was not afraid of a bear. Why would he be afraid of an unclean, nasty Philistine in his mind? Why would he be afraid of that? So he looked at him, he said, "Look, God was with me in all of those things. So he'll be with me with this giant." I was shopping with my daughter, and when she was little, she was probably 3. And we had lived up in the woods in a mountain, and we really did not do Halloween. The season is coming again. It's not a thing of God. And so we didn't do costumes, we didn't do skeletons, we didn't do any of those crazy things. And we were standing, I went to buy some fabric, we were standing in Joann's fabric, and all of a sudden I hear the lady saying, excuse me. And I was like, she was really mad. And I said, what? She goes, you need to control your child. And I'm like, she's the little girl. And I look back, and my daughter had taken a display, a really one with warts and everything, and she had it on the floor, and she was stomping on it. And I said, Brianna, what are you doing? And she goes, it's evil, Mom, it's evil. And I said, yeah, it's evil, but it's their evil thing, And she was not afraid to go forward and just get that thing and knock it down. The same was with this guy. He just said, I can do this. So he goes out, and he goes, because I know God. And he goes out, you know all the story. He doesn't want to wear the big armor. He wants to fight in what he knew every day. He wants to fight using the same lessons God had been teaching him every day. God is already preparing you for the battle ahead. He's been teaching you every day with your bosses, with your children, with the neighbors, with all kinds of people. He has been teaching you for the battle that is ahead of us. And we don't have to be afraid because we know he has been with us in these things. So it says, and I'm going to go again in my Bible. So the Philistine, this is in verse 43, if you're following in your Bibles. So the Philistine said to David, am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. By his gods. The Philistine stood up there thinking he was doing something, cursing out David. Look at this little nothing. But the giant did not understand that he was not the giant. The giant was David. The giant was the God of David. And here he was, and David looks up to him, and I'm going to do the Nancy Short version of it. David heard him cursing at him, and he laughed at him. He says, I'm going to throw you up in the wind. This is what the giant says. David says, God's going to give you to me, and I'm going to cut your head off. And he runs towards him. This is what giants do. His little giant David runs towards this guy. You know the story. A little stone between the eyes, placed perfectly by God of the universe. Down goes the giant. David does not even have a sword, so he uses Goliath's sword. God always does this. Whenever you are challenged and people say, God always takes whatever they do to you and turns it back on them. He always does it. It's almost kind of funny the way he does it. And he turns around and he cuts David's head off. And he's gone. He's dead. Oh, did I do it backwards? Yeah, okay. Here's the deal. This is the important part. When the men of Israel saw this giant, they were desperately afraid because they did something. And I started reading this book. If you want a book that changes your life, and I'm just going to show you because I'm not taking credit for any of that. This is the book called Don't Give the Enemy a Seat at Your Table. And Sonia was telling me about it, and I had just started listening in. Here's the deal. When you give the enemy of God a seat at your table in your mind, then he is already winning the battle. There are going to be a lot of giants in your life, but it's when you invite them in and you listen to what they're saying and what they're telling you that you have invited Satan into your table. You have asked that this enemy of God influence you. It is not God who condemns you. It is not God who overwhelms you with shame and guilt. It is not God who shrinks you to be nothing and have no voice. That's Satan, the enemy of God. If you let him come to your table and influence your brain and begin to believe the giants, you will be afraid. You will. But we are not following those dark places, dark thoughts, the prince of lies. We are following Jesus. He does not make us afraid. He gives us courage. He walks with us. He never abandons us. He doesn't make us feel constantly ashamed. We have allowed a killer to sit with us in our brains. All of Israel had allowed a giant to convince them that God did not have the power to save them. And they let that lie in, and it killed their love and reverence for God. So here it is. We go, and we realize it is time. We have the attitude of the little giant, where we can say, "What, you unclean, uncircumcised Philistine? I'm not listening to you. You're not from God. You're a liar." And so they end up letting it go. People knew my crazy notes that I have. David had a knowledge of God, and he knew that God would be with him. He knew not to be afraid. Didn't matter if the giant had fur on it. Didn't matter if the giant had teeth and claws, or if it yelled and bellowed, and the giant did not matter. The giant does not matter. He didn't care if it screamed and yelled and belittled and mocked his God and mocked the army of God. And who knows, he probably had bad breath too. He knew God was able to deliver him. And he knew that God would not fail him because he had never failed him before. I want to look in 1 Samuel 18:14. 18:1-4. I keep doing that. I put them together. There's somebody else who sees what happens. Now, when he had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And verse 2, Saul took him that day and would not let him go home to his father's house anymore. And 3, then Jonathan and David made a covenant because he loved him as his own soul. And 4, and Jonathan took off his robe that was on him and gave it to David, with his armor, even to his sword and his bow and his belt. Here's what it is. Jonathan is standing, and Jonathan was a man of war. He had killed lots of Philistines. He was standing on that battlefield, and he saw this guy his own age run up to him with no armor and take down, boom. And after 40 days of fear, in one fell swoop, that giant fell to the ground. And Jonathan goes to David, and he knows. Jonathan knows that this is the next king of Israel. And Jonathan sees him, and he is the inherited king. He is the next king. He has every right to the kingdom. He is the son of the king. And he removes his robe and wraps it. I think this is one of the most beautiful pieces of scripture because it's us. Because we are the little Davids. We are the little giants. And our brother, Jesus, whose heart is so knit to us, runs in and he takes his robe and he wraps us with the robe of the kingdom of God. He wraps us with Jesus' own robes of righteousness. He takes off his armor and he hands to us the sword. What a beautiful, he hands over all of his rights to us. And Jesus and God have handed over all their rights and come to get us. What an honor. What an honor. And it's such a silent thing that the people of Israel don't even know what's happened, that the kingdom has passed from the hand of Saul to the hand of David. And Jonathan saw it. He knew exactly what was happening. And now enters a worse giant for David. We think the big giants are scary, but it's not the big giants. It is the giants anointed of God. Who is the next giant? Saul, that's right. He's jealous, he's crazy, he's murderous, and he was anointed. And for 40 years, he was anointed. And for 40 years, he was the king. And he let that power go to his head and began to not follow the things of God, but to follow the things he wanted. He even went so far as to build a statue for himself after a battle. After a battle where he had disobeyed God. And he built himself a statue. This guy is the guy that comes after David. This is a sneaky giant. This is a political giant. This is a giant who used his power, his prestige, his position. He used everything he could to try 6 times to kill David. 6 times. And David didn't even know, why are you trying to kill me? What have I done to you? Because he hadn't done anything. He hadn't done anything. But that's how it feels when that kind of giant comes after you. They go through you and they blame you for everything. And their ability to turn and make it look like you're the bad one. And here's David. He wished one fell swoop will not kill this giant. And he has to be very careful because this giant is just anointed. So he's a leader. And he doesn't know what to do about that. Because what do you do? What do you do when the giant that is over you is cruel? He has religious authority. Saul had religious authority. And but you know what the secret was? That what saved David? Jonathan. Because Jonathan would go around, just like Jesus does, and said, don't go here. You need to flee. This is what he's going to do. Because Jonathan always had an eye out for his friend, who he knew was anointed of God. Something happens to people when they get too much power. When they begin to use it to control and dominate others. They take advantage for their own personal use, for their own personal power, for their intimacy, for prosperity. There's a big one. They have been given a position by God sometimes or they have been given a position in the family, maybe they're matriarch or patriarch, and they have used that power to control the people under them. And they do it to the point where this person is not allowed to express themselves, is not allowed to think independently. This kind of leader sucks out and destroys the life of the people that work for him, work under her. This is the kind of giant that he is now dealing with. And David has to hide. He's still fighting all the Philistines in between, but he's trying so hard. And even to the point when David and Jonathan meet, they weep. They weep over Saul, that how could we have lost this beautiful person who is now taken over by this power of jealousy? And we're watching this play out so many times. I wanted to tell you, there is a lady that I recently got to hear her speak. And as she came to the podium, it was kind of funny. As she came to the podium, she was bent over. She looked like Queen Elizabeth. I mean, at first I thought and she came and she was really bent. And I thought, she's going to die in front of all of us. And she barely walked, and she got up there. And when she began to speak, something happened. I saw a divinity come over her. I saw a nobility that came. It seemed like she stood up. And as she spoke, her words were so golden, straight from the throne of God. But she told a story, and I want to share it, and I shared it with the people on the board. So I'm sorry, this was actually part of the sermon, and for some reason God told me to share it with the board too. And I think it was for the visitors that were there, which was interesting. But this woman's name is Diane Langbird, and if you've heard of her, she's written a lot of books on psychology. And she's amazing. She started in about 1980, and she was 22 years old. And her first jobs were working with veterans that have PTSD, thank you, that's the one, and trauma. And she started working with victims of domestic violence. And then she went into helping people who had come out of the Holocaust. She was dealing with victims, then it became victims of war. I mean, she was a therapist for the most horrible, difficult situations. So as she was going through this, she began to pray, God, teach me how to swim in this river. God, show me your heart for these people. Please show me how to love those who are suffering with horrific pain. And she said she went through, and there was just, God kept giving her lessons after lessons on suffering and how to work with it. And she came across at one point a situation that stopped her in her tracks, probably 10, 15 years after she was doing all of these things. She began to run into shepherds who had become predators. And she began to run into pastors and priests who were abusive. And when she went to report what was happening, she was patted on the head and said, nice girl, these kind of things just happen. You just got to ignore them. When she reported about domestic violence, she was basically said, oh, women complain about this stuff all the time. When she went after some pastors and priests, they were just moved to another place. They were covered up, and here it is, they preserved the system over the victims. They preserved, listen to this, they preserved the system over the victims. This happens in sports, happens with coaches, it's been happening with all kinds of victims. Well, she just didn't know what to do with this because she said she felt like they were whitewashed tombs. These were supposed to be people of God. These were the people that we trusted, that kids trusted, that women trusted. She began to see and saw how everything was covered up. She saw a giant, and she basically was patted on the head, say, "Oh, you're a nice little girl. You keep helping other people." And she went home and she said, "I'm done, God. Enough is enough. I'm not doing this anymore." When she saw how these people were and how they were covering it up, she said, "I'm done. I'm not going to do it. Not going to work for you anymore. I'm done." And so she, that night, she did not say how he did this. I don't know if he gave her a dream or if he just talked to her heart, but he told her, "It's not your work. It's my work. I have invited you to come into my heart and do my work." Counseling, ministering, being a friend, it's not always nice. It's not always nice. Sometimes you have to face very evil, ugly giants. Sometimes you are invited into pain. Give me more of Jesus. Let me put on Jesus' robes. Let me take up his sword. Let me put on his armor. Let me pray. And as Becky always says, "You got this. God's got you." And I always say, I put on my preaching angels and I just go forward. We have been called to bear the burden of others. It is not our job to be afraid of giants. God's going to take care of the giants. He is. Our kindness. People want, "I want a big church with 1 million people," and that isn't the sign of God being with you. Great fame. That's not a sign of God is with you. Kindness is a sign God is with you. Kindness, it's a very simple thing, but the world's lacking it. You are human vitamins for somebody else, and you are going to come into their life, and you're not afraid of their giants, and your kindness is like that little stone that goes round and round and perfectly placed slays what they are afraid of. We are not to look at numbers. We are not to look at a king. We are to look at the King. And just for fun, when we were in Galapagos Islands, we were in Ecuador, and it was really comical. I skipped a whole part of my sermon. I just realized, but I'm letting it go. We decided we were going to do the story of David and Goliath, and for fun, because we had a whole bunch of kids that were gymnastics. And so we had these two guys that decided one was going to sit on the shoulders of the other one, and we made this long, long, long dress so that it would look like Goliath, a big, tall Goliath, and he would come in the church, and we were not thinking it through because the kids were terrified of him. He was in the hallway and they were like, "Ah!" But as he came through the doorway, his head hit the door because people are shorter down there. And it knocked the head off of Goliath. It knocked the whole top guy just fell backwards. And he was laying in two pieces, and the kids all started clapping. Yay! We killed the giant. I'll never forget. It was one of the funniest things I've ever watched. Ruined the whole children's story, but perfect. God has a plan. Our job is to carry stones. Our job is to be brave and run forward. Just run forward. See what happens. May God bless you and keep you and be someone who is after the heart of God. David was, this is why God loved him. This is why God said, this is a man after my heart. Because he was more brave than smart. He didn't care. He just ran forward and gave it a whirl and just see what God does. Anyway, thank you guys so much.